Dear friends and colleagues from all over Europe, a warm welcome from the European Movement's offices here in Brussels for another democracy table in the context of our Listen to Europe project. This time discussing trends, developments in Portugal, especially with view on how to communicate better about democracy and Europe. This particular democracy table is organized in partnership with the Youth Council of Portugal, and a big thank you to our partners at the Youth Council for all their support in organizing this democracy table. As I mentioned at the beginning, those events are aimed at sharing with partners and colleagues from civil society and elsewhere the results of work we have been undertaking in the context of the Listen to Europe project. The objective of the project is to conduct opinion poll research and also social media listening with the intention of understanding the conversations that our fellow citizens are having, their views on specific issues, and then use that information to educate ourselves so we can frame our messages better and target our intended audiences more effectively, with the intention of informing the debate around Europe and democracy with positive narratives, counteract some of the misinformation and negative messaging that circulates on social media and elsewhere, and put forward a much more positive and pro-European, pro-democratic position on the future of our continent. And to do that, we have partnered with experts on the field to help us both with opinion poll research, but also social media research. And to do that and to present the findings of our report, we have with us two of those close collaborators. Matthew MacWilliams, who was responsible for putting together and fielding the opinion poll, which was conducted by YouGov on the field. And with him will be also Rebecca Escudero, who works for Commons, a leading company in the field of media landscaping and social media research. Perhaps we can start with you, Matthew. Thank you very much again for joining us and for all the work you have done. We look forward to hearing the findings of the opinion poll research in Portugal, and then also discussing a little bit how to use the data and the knowledge that comes from the data to communicate more effectively. So we start with you, Matthew, and then we'll move to Rebecca.
Well, thank you very much, Petros, and thanks to the Youth Council and the European Movement International for hosting this work, and all of you for participating today. We're going to be discussing the survey results, survey in Portugal, around 900 plus samples, so it's a good national sample. And I just want to warn you, this is a strategic analysis. So much of polling reports that are done are just data, and you can't really use it. I'm going to look at the data, but through different lenses to help you use it. And at the end, if you hang in for, it's a long presentation, but if you hang in for the end, you'll see exactly how you can apply it in terms of targeting your message online and also framing your message to reach persuasive and base audiences. Now, one last caveat, please do not take notes. There's way too much data for you to take notes. Just listen, think. You will all be able to get this entire presentation and download it and look at it later. But there is a lot of data, so don't take notes. It will just be too difficult for you. So first, how does a poll start? How do we start the poll? The poll is very similar at the beginning to polls that are done and you've seen before. So obviously demographics a very important part of it. But then we really go a different place. And that's because we're trying to look at this poll and use this data strategically. We look at something called worldviews, a hostile sexism, populism, authoritarianism, where people fall on the ideological spectrum. And this funny thing called EU segmentation that we'll spend a lot of time talking about today. So we look, these are considered to be worldviews or developed behaviors. And we look at those in the poll and go into detail in the poll. And that's what makes it different. This different from polls you might see in the newspaper. They don't touch these things. We also look at a series of sort of fundamental values: pride in country, social cohesion, traditions, how people feel about democracy, their tolerance towards other people, and demand for order. A whole nother set of questions that you never really see asked in a poll. And the question is, the importance here is we just don't ask these questions. We use them to understand who people are, how they think, what their attitudes are, and what their behaviors are. And then finally, we come to the typical questions you see in the poll, all the issue questions. Where do people stand on women's rights, institutions, threats, climate change, social justice? And those are important questions to have, but they're really useful if you filter the answers through the worldviews like hostile sexism or authoritarianism, and critical values that people hold, their thoughts about democracy, and their demographics. And why is this important? Because when we do that, we can really target and frame messages for individual audiences, which is the goal here. And then finally, we do this one weird thing, and you say, what is this? Reverse engineering questions. Many of your colleagues gave us questions that they thought would be descriptive of how people behaved in Portugal. And these questions are atypical, not typical at all for a poll. And they're questions that we can use to tie up a lot of our conclusions to online behaviors, which means we can go from a poll data point to a poll insight to communications online. And we'll find that you will at the end that the reverse engineering questions give us a lot of different ways into reaching specific groups of target audiences in Portugal. So at the end of this last 20 slides, believe it or not, I'm going to apply this everything you're about to see, to segmentation and targeting that you can use today after this is over, and framing and messaging that you can use today to communicate positively about really almost any set of issues, but certainly about the EU and the EU's and Portugal's partnership. So let's start, because I like to ask people questions, with 4 questions of all of you. And these are yes or no questions. So in your own mind, answer yes or no. First question: is a democratic political system in my country is a very good or fairly good way of governing my country? So yes or no, democratic political system, a very good or fairly good way of governing my country. That's the first question, yes or no. Question number 2, democracy is preferable to any other kind of government, yes or no? All right, question number 3, and keep track, how many yeses do you have? Why don't you keep track of yeses? This question is asked backwards, so watch what we're doing. Yes or no? It's reverse. Army rule is a bad or very bad way of governing my country. Yes or no? So if you like army rule, you say, no, I think army rule is a really good way of governing my country. If you don't like army rule, you say, yes, it's a bad way or very bad way of governing my country. So how many yeses do you have now? And then the fourth one, and watch this question: a strong leader who does not have to bother with parliament or elections is a bad or very bad way of governing my country. So a strong leader who doesn't bother with parliament or elections is a bad or very bad way of governing my country. Yes or no? Now tally them up. How many yeses did you have? If you said yes to all 4 questions, you are what we consider a consistent supporter of democracy. And this is a measure that's used really around the world. And it first started in the United States, but it takes questions from the World Values Survey and other surveys that have been asked for decades and puts them into a scale of consistency of support for democracy. And I would bet most of the people on this call answered all 4 questions yes, which means probably 70, 75, 80% of us, your typical audience I speak to, are consistent supporters of democracy. So let's take it back to Portugal. What percentage of citizens in Portugal always support democracy. What percent of citizens answered yes to all four of those questions in our poll? Get a number in your mind. I think most of you are probably saying 50, 60, maybe 70%. Well, the answer is not that. The answer is 29%, less than a third, just under a third, of people in Portugal, Portuguese, always support democracy. Now, you might say, oh, that's kind of surprising, but it is not atypical. The United States, last time this was done, it was 49% of citizens in the United States always support democracy. Across Europe, from the 2019 survey, here are 13 European countries. You can see Denmark was the highest, 68%. Bulgaria was the lowest, 15%. Portugal really fits in the cohort of groups that go from Estonia to France. There's really very little statistical difference between a 29 and a 34 or 37 here. So Portugal is in one of the, isn't in the high cohort, it's sort of in the middle cohort, but it's still something to be aware of. And why should you be aware of it? When you communicate, you probably assume that most people, yeah, let's go, democracy, love it. The fact is that many people have problems with certain parts of democracy, and they aren't consistent supporters of democracy. Now let's look at this on a graph, and I want you to take a second to stay with this graph because you're going to see a lot of graphs like this from now on. This is support of democracy. On the vertical, we have percent of population, so the vertical axis. So you can see there's your 29%, you can see 10, 20, 30, 40. Across the bottom of this scale are bars. The blue bars in every scale you see from now on, any bar that's blue is the position supports democracy or civil society. Yellow is where it's starting to turn towards supporting a liberal democracy. I'll use Orban's language here. And orange to red are people who really oppose democracy, civil society, progressivism. They are more authoritarian, more autocratic, more for the strong leader. And as you can see, every graph will be displayed this way: blue bars, yellow, orange, quick ways for you to understand what's going on, okay? So here we have 29% totally consistent support in Portugal for democracy. See that yellow bar? That's people who voted once against democracy or made one of those no choices. What question did they drop out on? Well, here's the question. Having a strong leader who doesn't have to bother with parliament and elections is a good way or very good way of governing Portugal. So basically, they want a strong leader to solve problems, or they're open to it. I don't know if they want it. They are open to it. You'll see later that they're open to it, but they might not really like it that much. And the question is, who are those people? People don't walk around. When you go outside and walk down to the cafe today or to get a coffee or something, you don't see people with signs saying, I'm a totally consistent supporter of democracy. I'm 1 for 4. So how can we define these people and everyone who's in the orange and red? Can we? And the point is that the results are actually we can define them through worldviews and demographics and other attitudes. So let's look at these people. The people who are totally consistent supporters of democracy are not authoritarians as measured in the poll. These are all measured in the poll. Not hostile sexists. They're on the left, as you would expect. They're older, they're male, and they're higher educated. Those who are inconsistent supporters are more likely to be authoritarian, hostile sexist, ideologically on the right, younger, female, and less educated. Now you might say hostile sexist and female, they don't go together. This is from regression analysis. So it looks at each item individually against the dependent variable. And where the women really fall out is on, as you'd expect, having a strong leader. Hostile sexes fall out across all of the 4 questions. One thing that is consistent across all of this is that younger people in Portugal, in Germany, in France, the Netherlands, United States, you name it, where we poll it, younger people are less supportive of democracy. And my belief, and not my belief, my analysis of this based on lots of research and lots of data is that younger people are frustrated with democracy. It takes too long to get things done. They want things done now, like climate change. Let's just solve it. And they're not finding that, so they're more likely to say, let's just have a strong leader, my leader, who will go and get things done. Someone who will get things done. So we can take all these questions and divide them up by these different variables, by these different worldviews, if it's authoritarianism, by demographics, if it's older or higher educated. And there's one other way we can divide them up, and that's by this thing, look down on the lower right-hand corner, EU Seg 4. That would be European Union Segment 4. And you're going to say, I'd never heard of that before, and that's okay, no one has. But now you're going to learn a lot about this, because we find out that the European segments, European segmentation, is a very good way of sorting the citizens of Portugal, the Portuguese. It's an excellent way of sorting them attitudinally. And when we add in authoritarianism on top of it and some of these other variables, it's an excellent way of sorting them. And if we can sort them into segments, we can communicate with them by segment 2. And so there are 4 segments that come out of just 3 questions asked about the European Union. The 4 segments are, I'm enthusiastic. That's a blue bar. Remember, blue is good and dark blue is even better. 44% of Portugal fits into EU segment 1 enthusiasts. 34% are moderates, 14% are ambivalents, 8% are skeptics. The yellows and the red, that's the opposition. Red is hard opposition. You will never convince them, at least in my lifetime. The 14 are not worth it. They represent 22% of Portugal. Very, very difficult. If you got 1 out of every 10 of them, you'd be lucky. But you can see there's a good base, really strong base of enthusiasts and a bunch of moderates. And we can map on top of this variables. We can map on top of it worldview. We can map on top of demographics and fundamental values. So we find that enthusiasts of the EU are consistent supporters of democracy. Everyone who answered yes 4 times. They're not populist. And on the inverse, opponents are inconsistent when it comes to democracy. They're populist. And interestingly enough, they never attend church. So here we've got a demographic coming in, church attendance too. What else can we know about them? Well, we can really think about these audiences as base, the base support for EU integration and the EU project. Persuadable, that would be the 34%. The next level, persuadable, the 14%, though again, I think if you get 1 out of 10 of them, you're lucky. And then the hard opposition. But you could see Portugal is one of the most strongly supportive of EU, as you already know. And here's the example. Here's the data that proves it. So when we look at these worldviews, when we look at these segmentation, demographics, we find that there's a divide in Portuguese public opinion. And that divide shapes political choices, attitudes, and identity. And if you can define that divide, you can use it to structure communications. So what are components of that divide? Well, first, the worldviews we've talked about. Not on every issue, but on many. Authoritarianism, hostile sexism, ideology, populism. And these aren't just terms. They are terms that are defined in the poll, and we ask people where they stand on them. We don't say, are you authoritarian or not? We ask a bunch of child-rearing questions to figure out authoritarianism. So first, it's worldviews. Second, it is demographics, your age, your education, your gender, and church attendance actually matters on a few issues. And then finally, what I consider learned behaviors. Support for democracy, that's what we started with. Support for the EU. When you're born, you don't say, I'm a supporter of democracy when you're 6 months old, or I support the EU when you're 6 months old. You learn these behaviors. But these 10 worldviews, demographics, and learned behaviors can be applied to almost any issue in Portugal and tell us where people will come out on that issue. And what does that mean? Here's what it means. Let's look at political choices. This is political choice from 2021 presidential election. Were you for the Social Democratic Party or the Socialist Party, or did you support enough, Jacob? And just so you know, here's the actual vote in the presidential election and the reported vote in the polls. So you can see the poll was very close. Poll was done well after the presidential election, but it's how people told us they voted. So very, very close. All right. So political choices, we can sort these political choices and know what these political choices are going to be by basically knowing these different things. If you're a consistent supporter of democracy, ideologically on the left, and you're a regular churchgoer, you're more likely to support PSD or PS. Ideologically on the right, you're going to support Chega. That seems makes sense, and it actually tests out statistically. When you see this information in the peach color, these are regression analysis data points. What else can we know about this? EU segments. 92% of the people in EU segment 1, those were the enthusiasts, supported PSD or PS. 51, half of the people in EU segment 4 supported enough. So we find that the EU segmentation also structures political choice. There's a real divide in this country, in your country, by EU segments. And that divide cuts through issue after issue. And attitudes. Let's look at attitudes. Satisfaction with democracy. Here's your basic very satisfied, somewhat dissatisfied, very dissatisfied. You can see 48% of the people in Portugal, Portuguese, are satisfied with democracy. A majority, 57%, are dissatisfied. Well, that's a little concerning, right? But let's look at it. And actually, when you see this on the outside, the dissatisfied is 3 times greater, 3.5 times greater than very satisfied. That's a concern. That means people are more dissatisfied. But we can also layer on top of this all sorts of demographics and worldviews. And you can see consistent supporter of democracy, not populist ideologically on the left, are more likely to be satisfied. The inverse of that, and never go to church, are somewhat dissatisfied. Those are also the people who are EU segment 4 people, more likely to be EU segment 4 people. And you can see when we add in the segmentation, the same thing. Satisfied, EU segment 1, 65% of them are satisfied about democracy. 51% of EU segment 2 is very dissatisfied when it comes to democracy. So you can see that these worldviews, demographics, specific demographics, and EU segmentation is a way to understand Portuguese public opinion, a very powerful way. What other attitudes? Well, here's a good one. The question here is, political extremism is a threat to Portugal's democracy and democratic institutions. Strongly agree with this, strongly disagree, blue to red. And you can see most people, we're at like 75% say, yeah, extremism is a threat to Portugal's democratic democracy and democratic institutions. They perceive the threat, and 50% say it's really bad. 61% of EU segment 1 strongly agree with this statement. Only 36% of EU segment 4 agree with this. All right, next question. We must defend democracy from authoritarians and extremists. You can see the numbers went up on the strongly agree. You're almost at 90% saying, yeah, in terms of agree. We got to defend democracy from authoritarians and extremists. The threat question was at 50%. You can see defending goes up another 14 points. That's a big, big number. All right. Do we see differences in a Portuguese population on this question? Yes, we do. 73% of EU segment 1 agrees and says we got to defend democracy from authoritarians and extremists. But if we layer in all these other variables, here's what we find. if you're inconsistent supporter of democracy, if you're a hostile sexist, if you're on the right ideologically, if you're younger, not all young people, but some young people, more than you would expect statistically, if you vote for enough, and if you're not a populist, key, you say, hey, I disagree. We don't need to defend democracy from authoritarians and extremists. You are really part of the core of a liberalism here. So if you're EU segment 4, and you're also all these other things circled in red, this is the liberal core in Portugal. These are the people, if you are communicating, you don't need to talk to. Not all young people. You got to break out the young people, right? There's some young people you're not going to get to. There are a lot who need education. There are a lot who support you too. It's probably a third, a third, a third. But that a third who said we don't need to defend democracy, you really don't need to talk to them right now. You need to get the people in the middle, the young people in the middle, and you need to bolster your base too. So that is a liberalism's core in Portugal. The good news is it's a lot smaller than in other countries. What other countries? Well, where I'm sitting right now, the United States of America, the liberalism core is like twice that. So I want to move to Portugal if we could. That would be wonderful if you'd let me in. Okay, other attitudes. Institutional trust. And I'm going to go quickly through these because I want to get to Europe. Trust in national government. Blue bar is high trust in national government. Blue bar is also high trust in the European Union. The red bar is not trust. And you can see people are more trustful of the European Union than they are your national government. But it's still all under 50%. All right. But then look at this. In terms of EU segments, here's trust. And just 52% of EU segment 1, much higher than the average. Trust the national government, only 17% of EU segment 4. So again, we see that same divide. I'm going to hammer on that divide and how useful these EU segments are. And in trust in the European, 70% of EU segment 1 say, hey, I have high trust in the European Union. Only 14% of EU segment 4, which really goes back to my point here that these people are really hard to reach. They are your opposition base, okay? Let's keep moving on. Pride in country. You know, I would think there'd be great pride in Portugal. I have visited, I love it. And you can see in this graph, the blue is, dark blue is very proud, quite proud of the country. It's almost 85%. Pride in the country, which is really spectacular. That's a great number. There's some who are not very proud and not proud at all. Who are those people? You are going to be surprised. If we look at EU segments 1, 2, and 3, you can see 9% of EU segment 1 not proud, 13% of EU segment 2, 22% of EU segment 3. So the first two are below average. The next one's above. Look at EU segment 4, 50% of EU segment 4, those are the skeptics, are not proud or not proud at all of Portugal. So pride is ours. Our people, our base, our persuadables have great pride in Portugal, our country. It is the people who are in the ambivalence and skeptics for sure, EU segment 4, who do not have pride in the country. That's a really important attitudinal thing to know, because you can talk about pride in the country, and you should talk about pride in country. Identity is another thing. First, you can be proud of your country, then what's your identity? And here, the question is simply, how do you think of yourself? Portuguese only, Portuguese and European, that's the next bar over, European and Portuguese, or European only, or I don't know. And you can see about a third of the population identifies as Portuguese only, but over 50% identify as Portuguese and European. And that's key to know. Why? Because when we look at segments and we apply segments on it, EU segment 1, over 60% say they're Portuguese and European, not just Portuguese. And only 28% say they're Portuguese only. And if we look at EU segment 4, we see 43% Portuguese only, 32% Portuguese and European. So segment 4, they don't have great pride in country, but they define themselves, they're more likely to find themselves, and put more likely probabilistically every time I say something, because this is all about probability, right? Segment 4 is more likely to say they're Portuguese only, they are nationalists, strong nationalists. They're a small number of people overall in Portugal, but they're strong nationalists. And we've looked at attitudes that divide. Now let's look at attitudes that people share. Generally share, there's some places where they drop out here. And when I mean share, usually they're very high numbers, but also we don't see statistical differences in different regression analyses. So risk averse. Portuguese say no to radical change. Here are the two questions. It's too risky to support political parties with radical ideas for change. 73% of your country people agree with that. Only 27% say, yeah, let's elect a radical political party with radical ideas. Okay. Next question. Yes, about if you're open to changing traditions. 75% of Portugal is open to changing traditions to make Portugal better off. Only 25% say we got to stick to the traditions we have. So what you have is people don't want radical change, but they're willing to change traditions gradually if it will make Portugal better off. And that's a very shared attitude across almost all worldviews and demographics, except for authoritarians and people who voted Chega. Enough. They want Portugal to stick to traditions. That is what they care about. Okay, other shared attitudes. And these are ones I will warn you to be worried about because they are worrisome as we go down. And the bottom is still blue, red still means the same, but notice that the metrics have changed. Blue is now strong disagree, red is strong agree, because this is coded for a pro-democracy, pro-liberal to anti-democracy, anti-liberal. So strong disagree with this question. Sometimes I feel like a stranger in my own country. As people care about civil society, we don't want people feeling like a stranger in my country or in Portugal. So I would disagree with that question. But as you can see here, more people agree with the question, either somewhat or strongly, than disagree. So people are feeling somewhat alienated in Portugal. Why? Well, and if you look at segments just quickly, 59% of EU segment 4 agree that they feel like a stranger in their country. 37%, more than a third of EU segment 1 agree. That's a little concerning number to me. Let's dig down a little bit more. People like me are being left behind. Same scale, and you can see that somewhat agree and strongly agree. See those arrows going up in either? Those numbers have gone up from stranger, a little bit different scale, to being left behind. The numbers have gone up. And now 74% of EU segment 4, 3 out of every 4 people in segment 4 feel like they're left behind. And EU segment 1, those are our EU enthusiasts, right? Who like democracy, care about civil society, are proud of their country. They feel like they're being left behind too. Almost half of them feel like they're being left behind. Okay, so what is the key to this being left behind? I think you already know it, but we'll go through this data. People like me don't benefit enough from Portugal's economic success. There's a perception of difference in the distribution of economic rewards. And you can see the strongly agree number really has grown to almost, it's more than 3 out of every 10 people say they strongly agree that people aren't benefiting. So they feel like a stranger in their country. They feel like they're being left behind, and they're being left behind economically. And let's look at the EU segments on that. A majority of all EU segments, from 1, 55%, to 4, 78%, feel they don't benefit enough from Portugal's economic success. That's a danger sign. That's why I put a little exclamation point there. We also put the danger sign. Woo, danger, danger. That's very dangerous. That's dangerous. And it goes to this question: economic inequality is growing in Portugal. Look at the strongly agree now. So stranger, being left behind, it's because there's economic inequality in Portugal and people are concerned about it and they don't like it and they see it as a real problem. And this is the problem that you must address to keep Portugal on a democratic, democracy-loving, civil society supporting country. And let's look at the EU segments here. This is real. I see put storm warning up. This is real danger. The percentages who agree that economic inequality is growing in Portugal are all above 80% or above. That is very dangerous. And the first thing you would expect takes us back to the top of my presentation. The first thing that you would expect is, support for a strong leader to support this. And we noticed in the polling that we shared that over 30% of people said, a strong leader who wouldn't pay any attention to parliament and bother with elections would be a good thing. I'd be okay with that. So what we should see in the next question, or we could see, is support for a strong leader to fix this growing economic inequality, and we don't. We don't, and that's very important. The question here is to bring Portugal back to order, we need a strong leader who's willing to break the rules. And as you can see, just over 50%, that would be the dark blue bar, strong disagree, and the somewhat disagree bar, disagree with that notion. Another 20% are in the middle. And what we've got, the fever is broken. Yes, I feel like a stranger in my country. Yes, I feel people are being left behind. Yes, I think economic inequality is bad, but I'm not really willing yet to opt for a strong leader to fix all these things, or who promises to fix all these things. We know a strong leader won't fix those things or is unlikely to fix those things, but that is the siren song of authoritarianism. So the fever is broken right now, which means we don't see the strong agree, we see it as a strong disagree. But let's look at it by EU segments. 61% of EU segment 1 strongly disagrees with this. 33% of EU segment 4 strongly agrees. So EU segment 4 is already down the road towards a strong leader. EU segment 1 and EU segment 2 are hanging in there. All right, that's Portugal by itself. Now let's look at views of European Union. I'm going to go through this quickly and then I'm going to summarize it all into something you can use today. So is Portugal and the EU on the right track or wrong track? Right track is blue. You can see Portuguese feel that European Union is a little bit more on the right track than Portugal itself, and a lot less on the wrong track. This is good news across the board. I mean, right track for Portugal is just under 50. Obviously, economic inequality, if we ask that, it would be different. That's the big problem that we're facing right now. How does this work in terms of EU segments? We have an inverse here, as you would expect. 77% of EU segment 1 say, yeah, EU's on the right track. Only 7% of EU segment 4 say that, and it's the exact opposite when we talk about wrong track. So EU segment 4 people think European Union's on the wrong track. Okay. And the thing that you need to worry about is EU segment 2 here. That don't know number is big. 31% don't know if the European Union's on the right track or the wrong track. We need to talk to them about the European Union and what the European Union is doing that helps Portugal. We want to move them to a right track number, and that will make them stronger supporters of the EU. These are people who are more likely to be in the moderate EU segment 2 or the ambivalent EU segment 3. All right, so what should the EU work on? What do Portuguese want the EU to work on? Well, number one, EU should address reducing poverty and social inequality. Totally fits with the concerns here about economic inequality. And they want improving the public health system. And then third, climate change. But I got to tell you, climate change is probably perfect for younger voters. But for the society as a whole, poverty and inequality is twice as important to them in terms of EU working on issues than climate change. Doesn't mean it can't change, but right now, that's the way it stands. And why should we remain in the EU? Why should Portugal remain in the EU? Well, freedom to study, live, work, and travel always comes up as number one in every EU country. Number 2 and 3 are very important, however. EU's work on women's rights and equality for all, and also EU's investment in improving the standard of living and improving the economy, which works directly with reducing poverty and inequality. So it's economic issues, it's rights issues in terms of women's rights and equality for all that are the most important issues for the EU to address. Generally, when it comes to climate change, younger voters, younger Portuguese are going to be very, very interested in that, obviously. Some quick attitudes on the EU. Solidarity. 2 questions, you get to choose one or the other. 84% of Portuguese say we should do everything we can to help other EU countries in need. Only 16% say solidarity is being pushed too far. So they're for solidarity within the EU. Portuguese also aren't nationalists. When EU's leaders disagree, I want decisions based on what is best for the EU as a whole. 75%, 3 out of 4 Portuguese agree with that. Only 25% take the nationalist position. I want my country's position to always prevail when EU leaders disagree. That said, Portuguese feel that EU leaders bicker too much. There's too much bickering in the EU. And you can see that somewhat agree, that orange bar and the red bar really high. You know, you got almost 60% of Portuguese saying, yeah, I agree, EU leaders bicker too much. And that goes back to decision-making, democracy, compromise taking time. There is impatience with that. There's impatience everywhere with that. This is really strong impatience. So I'm impatient with the EU. I'm kind of liking what they're doing, but I'm impatient with it. But is it a threat to Portugal's sovereignty? And you'll see here, no, it's not a threat. So the EU is not seen as a threat to Portugal's sovereignty, except by EU segment 4, and only 4 out of 10 of them see Portugal, EU as a threat to Portugal's sovereignty. So that whole argument is a pretty minor argument. It only works with the real opposition, the real skeptics, what we would call in our parlance the wingnuts. And I don't think it has a chance to grow. Now let's look finally just on some topical issues dealing with COVID. How did the EU deal with COVID? Good marks, somewhat good to very good dominates here, almost 80%. I'll say somewhat or very good. Only a few say bad or somewhat bad. As you would see, there's big difference. EU segment 1, 90% say good. EU segment 4, 71% say bad, which goes to why I don't think you can get EU segment 4 people back. And I think it's really hard to get EU segment 3. Concentrate on EU segment 2, especially younger voters, younger people there. Dealing with COVID, has it made it better or worse? So the EU has helped reduce the effects of COVID in Portugal, or EU has made the effects of COVID worse in Portugal? 82% say they've helped reduce the effects of COVID in Portugal. You've also done a phenomenal job with vaccination. 18% has made it worse. And again, you see the breakdown between EU segment 1 and EU segment 4, which is why I'm saying EU segment 4. They say that EU has made the effects of COVID worse in Portugal. Almost 1 out of every 10 of them have said that. And then finally, COVID shows we need a strong EU. So what EU did on COVID with Portugal shows that a strong EU benefits all members. Strong agree over 80% on this, and agree over 80%. Strong agree 59% with EU segment 1. Another thing to look at, and then we'll get to tying it up, the EU Recovery Fund, support for it. As you can see, we got strong support to strong oppose. The blues are the support. The support is very, very high for the EU Recovery Fund. As you'd expect, EU segment 1 has strong support, but almost 50% of EU segment 3 support the EU European Recovery Fund too. So we were talking about how do we get to EU segment 2 people? You talk about the European Recovery Fund. How do you get to EU segment 3 people? Even if you're going after them. Again, I think that they're secondary persuadable target. 50% of them say that the European Recovery Fund is a good thing, and they support it. Will the recovery fund help Portugal recover faster? Most people strongly agree or somewhat agree that it will. Who doesn't? Well, EU segment 4, 48% disagree that it'll help Portugal recover faster. And then look at these. Again, the reason why to talk about the European Recovery Fund, over 86% of EU segment 3 somewhat agree or strongly agree that the recovery fund is going to help Portugal recover faster. That's on the economy. That economy is the key thing, the key issue we need to address. So it's a great place to go. All right, so now in the last 10 minutes, I want to apply this. I know that was a lot of data, throwing a lot at you. Hope you see that the EU segments are good. The problem is we know how the population distributes in these EU segments. But as we said earlier, people don't walk around with a badge that says, I'm an EU enthusiast or I'm a EU moderate. You can't find those people walking around on the street and identify them. But how can we identify them? Is there a way to identify them? And actually, the worldviews, demographics, and other attitudes we've talked about are great ways to identify and segment, apply these segments to communications. So how do you do that? And this is where the real key of the presentation here. Well, first we know base persuadable 1, persuadable 2 in opposition. But we can apply on top of these top line variables and demographics to start sorting these. And these first gray ones here, they come from consistent support for democracy. So we know that in our base and in the moderates, those people are more likely to be consistent supporters of democracy and not populists. And we know in the demographics from the consistency with support question that, that they never attend church. Our opposition is less likely, much less likely to attend church. All right, well, that's helpful. I can go into Facebook right now or Instagram or Telegram or others, and not Telegram as well, Twitter, and I can start targeting by these. I can target very, very well on Facebook and Instagram by these. But what else? There's a lot else. Next, you'll see, I'm sorry, the first one was, this one is consistent support for democracy. And when you layer in consistent support for democracy, other variables and demographics that we find separating these segments, you find that we can add authoritarianism, hostile sexism, idiot on the left, older and higher education, when we're trying to find our base and persuadables in terms of targeting. So we can apply all these things through targeting platforms online and use it to sort our audience, not perfectly, but really well, into enthusiasts, moderates, and opponents. All right. So how would you find someone who's not a hostile sexist? Well, if I'm on Facebook, I look for someone who supports women's rights. So people who are interested in women's rights, yeah, those are people who are going to be enthusiasts or moderates. Older is easy, higher education is easy. And obviously with the younger, and I know the Youth Council people are listening in here, the younger people, we have to get down and drill down on how to split them out because they're not all in persuadable and opposition. I'd say probably a third of them are. We're really looking for those who are in the moderates. And there are ways, especially climate change is a way to sort those folks. What else can we layer on top? Political choice. You know, we have the choice in the 2021, the reported choice in the 2021 presidential election. Well, we can add these two variables on top. Regular churchgoers are more likely to be enthusiasts or moderates. Enough supporters are more likely to be in the opposition audiences. What else can we add? Defend democracy. Remember that defend democracy question? So now when you see green and blue together, like in not authoritarians, that means that the variable hit twice on two different issues we are looking at. So you can see Chega supporters even more in the opposition, more certain to be, and the sexism also playing out here, and the consistency of support for democracy playing out here too. But something you probably didn't notice is that there was a statistical anomaly in the data. and that's on populism. And here's the deal with populism. We need to throw that out as a way of sorting. Because on some things, populists are opposition audiences. On other things, especially support for democracy quite often, or defending democracy, they're for us. So we just need to throw it out as a way of thinking. It's not useful because it bounces around. I know that's going to be, oh my God, populism's the way we understand this. No, you can understand this divide through authoritarianism, hostile sexism, ideology, consistent support for democracy, and demographics. Issues also sort people quite nicely into base and opposition. And it's not just, do I like the EU or not? These are being applied on top of the EU. Satisfied with democracy, dissatisfied, pro-women's rights, women's rights, same with human rights, concerns about climate change. Climate's not an issue. These issues can be applied on top of it. And also EU issues, the ones we just went through. All of these can be used to sort the population. So how would you use EU? There's several great EU sorts, support for EU sorts on Facebook that you can use. So all of these can be applied to sort, to take these segments and apply them online so you can target enthusiasts and moderates for communications. And then finally, the last one that can be added are the reverse engineering questions. Remember, I talked to you about those and you said, what in heck are those? That's really stupid. I don't know what Matt is talking about. Here are the reverse engineering questions that really sorted people by EU segments. And this is, again, all statistically sound. Legalizing adoption, same-sex couples, don't legalize. I would just go to any LGBTQ plus targeting on Facebook and use that. Wearing a mask, don't wear a mask. That's going to be harder to use, but abortion rights. And then you can see some of your political figures sort as you would expect in terms of segmentation. Cristiano Ronaldo, people who like Ronaldo are much more likely and base and persuadable. And the next two are also great ways of sorting segments. All right, so now you can apply all of this online to sort by segments. What do you say to them? What do you say to them? Well, let's just think about this in terms of the EU and in terms of your basic messaging. First, the identity that you want to communicate to people, who you are as a person or as a group, is your Portuguese first, European second. It's not all EU, it's Portuguese first, European second. So, you saw the numbers on that, very high. You want to join those two together. Your emotions, hope, not fear. You have great pride in Portugal. Remember, our opponents don't have pride in Portugal. We have great pride in Portugal. And your outlook's future-oriented, focused on a better future for all. And that better future focuses in on poverty reduced, social equality, which gets to women's rights, human rights, and the other things, and better public health. That's your outlook. Those are the things you're working for. Reduce inequality, both social and economic inequality. The goal is a better economy, fairness, equality, social, political, and economic. And you must acknowledge and address economic inequality. I mean, that is the elephant, as we would say, in the room, which means that's the big issue you cannot ignore, is economic inequality. It is gigantic, and it can hurt if we don't acknowledge it and address it. So that's the basic framing. What about, and you can see how it fits with the EU's place in the world. People want EU to reduce poverty and social inequality. They want to improve the public health system. They want to work on rights and equality. And they want the EU to invest in standard of living and improve economy. So what can you say today? Say today to people, if we're just talking about the EU, I mean, this you can use for all your communications. And for the Youth Council, I would add in climate change when you're specifically talking to young folks. Here's what you can apply today. There are real benefits for Portugal, the EU. You can talk about those benefits. EU investments that are going to improve the economy. EU investments that are bringing the economy back. EU support. EU solidarity and stands on women's rights, equality, the freedom to travel, study, and work, and a stronger EU is good, and what Portuguese care about. And then recent examples of the benefits of EU, COVID-19 and the EU Recovery Fund. But you have to acknowledge that the EU is a work in progress. We'll go back to EU segment 2. They don't know if the EU is, if they trust the EU or not, 31% of them. You have to say the EU is a work in progress. It's not perfect. Yes, there's a lot of bickering, but it's helping Portugal, and it's good to be in solidarity with the EU, and it's good for the European project all along. So that is how you can use that message today with those target segments. So thank you for listening. I know it went on. I know it's a lot of information. And I'm going to turn it back over to, I think Rebecca's up next to tell you about listening to what people are saying online. Thank you very much.
Indeed. Thank you, Matthew. And I just want to reiterate what you said at the beginning, that a lot of this data and a lot of this information will be available on the dedicated website for this project, listentoeurope.info. And of course, we are available to discuss and further explain how to use this to apply. But without further ado, I'll move to Rebecca. Rebecca comes from Commons, a leading, innovative outfit that has been working on media landscaping for a while. We have the pleasure to partner with them in the context of these projects, but many other endeavors. So we have first-hand experience of the quality of their work. And I won't waste any more time. I'll invite her in to share with us her analysis and her research, because it often links very well with the opinion poll research and complements and supports and strengthens what we find and then how to apply it. So Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Petros and EMI team, for inviting us and for organizing this table. Also, Matt, for your presentation. It's always very, very inspiring to hear to you. And all the people attending, I hope the information I'm sharing is useful for all of you. So I think that you can see my screen, right? I'm going to switch my camera. Okay, so as Petros said, I am going to present an analysis that we have developed with EMI team in order to understand and to complement Matt's research on attitudes. And we are more digging into the perception and representations on social media about the European Union. And in this case, in 3 issues that EMI were especially interested on, which are democracy, the future of Portuguese society, and the recovery plan. So I'm going through very quickly through the scope and the methodology. So we have been mapping all the conversations in Facebook during the days that you can see on the screen. And we have combined quantitative and qualitative analysis. Quantitative meaning methods like text mining, for example, which is getting a lot of text data from Facebook in this case. And through different tools and programs, we have analyzed all the text to see what subtopics were emerging. And what we have seen with this analysis is that actually there is not a lot of attention given to the European Union in Facebook. So what we did in order to have a consistent database is to also do qualitative analysis in Facebook to identify subtopics related to democracy and the future, not directly related to the European Union, but to give us insights on how this could be linked in a narrative way. So starting with the main insights that we got from our analysis, as you all, I think, know, there is, and as Matt has also shown, there is in general like positive representations about the European Union in Portugal and in the case of social media. Most of the criticism comes more from progressive actors in our analysis in relation to the treatment to minorities, especially refugees and migrant people, and also related to neoliberal policies that are fostering economic inequality. This also links with what Matt highlighted. We have seen the relevance in related to this of materialistic values related to the economy when framing the European Union, and we will see how to use this. In general, what we have detected in the analysis is that there is high frustration and distrust in the Portuguese politics. And of course, this relates to corruption, is something that also happens in Spain. We in Commons are an organization from Spain, so I have seen a lot of similarities between both countries in our analysis. And in this case, like, political parties are using the European Union, are instrumentalizing it to attack different parties and especially the government. We have seen authoritarianism not in narratives related to the European Union, but just related to democracy and especially to minorities, especially in relation to migration, but also Roma people. And this is polarizing the conversation a lot. And we have to be careful because in Spain, we had a very similar situation as in Portugal. We didn't have a strong political authoritarian forces at the moment, but as some of you may know, Vox, through very good communications, targeting segments of audiences and spreading fear and hate towards these groups, they have changed the narrative about these issues like migration. So we have to take a look at this. But on the other hand, and in contrast, we have issues related to the future of the Portuguese society that are creating a lot of consensus between or among the society, like green economy, science and technology. So these are some opportunities that could help us to frame our research. So starting with the analysis, as I said, like, European representations are mostly positive. The European is seen as a civilization, like a good influence in the prosperity of the country, but also a guarantor of good values, democratic values, and so on. We have some like more ambiguous frames related to the European Union just as a financial source. What we usually do when we do narrative analysis is to try to identify which issues are dividing the society and which ones are unifying, because the ones dividing usually are harder to communicate on because there are a lot of strong emotions, a lot of reactive responses to the communication. So it is good to be aware of which issues are polarizing society and which ones are unifying in order to choose what to use when you are communicating about the European Union or any other concern that you want to communicate to a population. So regarding the divisive issues, we have seen that these are the ones where authoritarian groups are interested in. And is what I was saying, they are mostly about minorities, groups like Roma population, migration, refugees, and also social protection. And this is interesting because we will see that there is not a link between social protections and economic inequality, and this is interesting. So as I said, the far right and conservative groups are using these issues to create us versus them narrative. So us, like the hardworking Portuguese and normative citizens, and then with them, which are lazy people, violent people that want to take advantage of the goodwill of the Portuguese society. And then, in the other hand, we have the progressive actors who use more like very abstract concepts that we'll see that are not very close to the imagination of citizens reading this kind of content. They talk about human rights, equality, dignity, and so on, but they are not talking about concrete examples that may help citizens to understand the problematic. So we have two kinds of narratives or ways of framing these issues, which is the from one side us versus them narrative, but then we have like a very also another kind of othering in a way, which is talking just about them in a very abstract way. So this is an issue that is not completely related to the European Union. We will see that in a way it is, but it is very related to democracy and inequality, and it is interesting to understand this kind of distinctions. But we have some issues that are really unifying and are very good opportunities to communicate. We have sustainability and green economy, energetic poverty, science and technology. Some issues that are creating a lot of consensus. So most of people communicating in Facebook, and we access like public pages of all kinds. They have this common sense that really climate change is something urgent that it should be tackled, and that a green transition is an opportunity for social economic development. So this is something that there is no polarization at all. Also, energetic poverty, like there is a consensus that is something that cannot happen. Like it is not fair that salaries do not guarantee these basic living standards, and there should be this should be tackled and better choices should be taken. But this is not related to and I think I didn't mention it before. I'm going to go just a little bit, because if you see social protection at the bottom here, it is actually polarized, this issue. It is the progressive actors, they talk about opportunities and dignity, and the far right and conservative actors talk about, this otherness, like it protects lazy people. But then there is this, like common understanding that really economic inequality, energetic poverty, and so on should be tackled. But these links should be done, and this is something that is a narrative opportunity and something that may have sense to try. And finally, as a solution to the problems that we have seen before, science and technology are always tackled in a way. They are talking about how investing in science, technology, innovation, and so on could help to make more sustainable economies, societies, and so on. Going through the values, we have seen that economic and materialistic values related to the economy are very important. So when you are framing your content about the European Union, it is interesting to mention these values, and also democratic values like honesty and democracy itself. And when we analyzed the emotions, like most of them were negative, like frustration, indignation, anger, and they're really related to corruption of the government in relation to the funds, for example, and also these polarizing narratives that are coming from the far right. And now we are going through the issues to understand what are the main narratives that are dominating these three topics. Regarding democracy, first we have mapped which actors are communicating about this, and you can see that most of the actors communicating in Facebook are traditional media, political parties, and politicians, and then we have personal blogs. And it is there's kind of a balance between progressive and conservative actors. It is interesting that authoritarianism is really important for both progressive and conservative, but they see authoritarianism in a different light. Of course, for progressive, the far right is like a threat, and they talk about it. And for conservative actors are attacking the government for having like authoritarian measures in regards of the COVID crisis. Then we have racism, and this is the same that we have mentioned before in the divisive issue, so I won't mention it, but well, again, it is a polarized topic, and it is one of the most important topics related to democracy. Migration and refugees, the same thing. So these are some sample of posts you will receive if you haven't yet this presentation as well, and you can access like the post to see more about the kind of content that we have analyzed. Regarding the future, we see that in this case, media is like the actor that is spreading more information in Facebook, and most of them are conservative, liberal, and centrist. Progressive media is less present, but we have some content about social protection, as we said before, so a little bit polarized conversation. And on the other side, we have sustainability and green economy. So what we mentioned, and it's interesting that here it is not a division between ideologies, like both kind of media in this case are sharing the importance of tackling climate change and using research and innovation to tackle that. Then we have identified some content about unemployment as well, and the role of innovation in developing the society and creating more prosperous and sustainable economy. And finally, the recovery plan, as you can see, again, is dominated by media, but in this case, most of the media that are talking about this are from center, conservative, right, and liberal. And we have a lot of pessimistic narratives of these media attacking the government. So they use the recovery plan to attack the government and talk about corruption and how Portugal is not prepared to use the funds in a responsible way. Then we have some optimistic narratives about how the EU funding is an opportunity to change social and economic structure. There is, more interestingly, critical hope, so it recognizes the complexity of the situation, the weakness maybe of democracy right now related to the corruption of the parties, but also it recognizes that the funds could help to change this tendency, and then some narratives on prosperity. So just to end, some recommendations about how to communicate regarding what we have seen in the slides. So you have seen that there is a lot of frustration and fatalism regarding the politics, but there are some narrative opportunities that can unify society, sustainability and green economy, as we have seen. And what we have seen or what we have detected in our analysis in many countries, not just in Portugal, is that what helps better is to talk about concrete examples, not talk about sustainability in abstract or democracy, but to talk, for example, how the EU has funded like successful green initiatives and how this has helped to develop some local communities or some regions and so on. So these concrete examples that help real people can help to have this, like more material and real perceptions of the EU, not in an abstract way. The same with science and technology, how which are the most important research and development projects funded by the EU, and how it strengthens the society. And what I was saying before, like how to link, it would be interesting to see how to link energetic poverty and employment and these kind of issues with social protection, which right now has like a negative perception, at least in Facebook. Okay, so one of the main concerns that we have seen in our analysis is corruption. And this may be related to why there is a lot of young people, as Matt said, that really don't believe in democracy, but because, the definition of democracy is not very clear. Like sometimes we talk of democracy like if we really had democracy in our countries, but sometimes, as you see how political parties works and so on, this is questioned, especially by young people. So maybe talking about how the EU can increase government's accountability and can decrease corruption could be a good starting point for this. And finally, and this is something that we have seen also in our countries, is that all the conversations about the EU are highly institutional. They are just covered by political parties, and sometimes it is not something partisan. So we recommend to try to include other kind of actors like historians, economists, journalists, and so on, that could, add more diversity and engage other kind of citizens. So this is everything from my side. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Rebecca. And it is indeed clear the synergies that the two types of research can produce, and how we see certain themes emerging both through the social media listening and the general landscaping, and of course the opinion polling. And as we said at the beginning, the purpose behind this body of work, together with Commons, Rebecca and Matt, has been to improve the way we communicate with our audiences using data and analysis, because often we tend to come up with our messages and frame our messages based on our own worldviews or our own experience. And we have come to the conclusion that it's a much more effective way of getting our point across by using data and understanding the conversations that our fellow citizens are having, because ultimately we want to be able to spread our message, our pro-European, pro-democratic civil society message, to a wider audience. And that's very much at the core of this effort. We have a couple of questions for the time left, and I think they're probably both relevant to Matt and Rebecca, especially one from Dr. Avidi, who refers to the demise of fascism. Not so long ago, there was a fascist regime ruling Portugal. And to what extent, the question is, that has influenced people's perceptions towards democracy, authoritarianism, and other issues. And also the issue of corruption, whether that has come through, whether through the media listening or the opinion polling. So the legacy of fascism in Portugal, but also the problem of corruption. Have you seen that in any of the conversation? Maybe Matt, I can start with you if you can comment on either of those points.
Yeah, I think the second one is probably more for Rebecca, but the first one, the legacy of fascism, we don't measure that, but we can look at the predisposition to supporting a strong leader and fascism, and that is the authoritarian questions, and there are 4 of them. They come from the Frankfurt School, and really the predisposition in Portugal compared to other EU countries is low. I think, however, if you look at that 29% support for democracy, consistent support for democracy, and the one thing that they're falling out on, strong leader, there's some latent with older Portuguese demand for a strong leader or comfort with that as an option if things don't go well, which is why the economy is, as you all know, is so important. Solving that so it doesn't allow that to open and become a weaponized issue. Also, can I take 1 sec just to comment on, I think Rebecca's points about how the EU is all sort of presented as institutional, and this, it really fits with it. People just hate the bickering. And so having other people saying, hey, EU, they just did a great thing, and specifics of it, I think is very important. And I would look also, I'd add to your list just one thing, cultural influencers. So it's hard to make the EU and democracy cool, but the cooler we can make it, the better it will be for especially younger voters. Not just seen as this bickering thing that goes on and on, because when they don't see solutions happening, that's when authoritarianism can get activated, and that latent fascism that's there, and it's there in every country, can get activated. So I hope that helps.
Very much so indeed. Rebecca, do you have any thoughts on this latent fascism and also the influence of corruption in the public discourse?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about corruption, that we haven't analyzed it itself because it didn't came like very related to the European Union, but it is always very present in the southern countries of Europe, especially, and I think also in maybe in the West. But what we have seen in general is that, and this is something that happened in all the countries, that the concept of democracy is really empty of meaning right now. Like all actors are appropriating this concept, and it depends on which actors, which country, this defining a very different way. So, and I think that young people is maybe like more aware of this than, and this is something like it's my personal opinion right now, like, but in the in the general public, not in the experts and so on, but in the general citizens, I think that what happens, especially in the countries with high corruption, is that when you listen to media, social media, and so on, we talk about democracy as if the parties and the institutions were democratic, but it is something that it is being delegitimized in the last years, especially from the Occupy movement in different countries and so on. They did a great work in showing that we maybe don't have the democracies that we would like to have. And I think that, of course, it is very, very related to corruption in the countries of the South. And maybe we should work on reframing what democracy is, and to have like a common ground where we could talk about this issue, because right now it's not very clear, I think.
Yeah, and just to add to that, there's just wrote a piece in the U.S. about this. Democracy as a concept is totally contested at this point. And to assume that everyone's woohoo democracy is just wrong. And because through polling, we can observe what should be democratic democracy support for democracy. We don't say, hey, are you for democracy or against it? Yes, different things you can put together in a scale. But the definition of it for people is very unclear, and there's great frustration. And democracy in the next 2 to 4 years through specific elections and activities that will go on is really going to be challenged. And you see the first challenge to that, the sort of second wave, it's Democracy Challenge 2.0 about to happen in Hungary in April 3rd, where some very, very bad things could go on.
Indeed. And I think often that is the problem when the institutions that underpin democracy get hijacked, overtaken, and then used against democracy itself. And we have seen this in various places in Europe, both inside the EU but also outside, where democratically elected politicians then use their power, their dominance in parliament to change, in effect, the constitution, hijack several institutions that underpin the democratic system, and then claim themselves to be re-elected and re-elected through democratic means, but in effect having exterminated the very basis of democracy. There is one other question actually from our audience, and that has to do a little bit with the information and knowledge, both on the EU specifically, but also in general about some of the issues that we surveyed, be it the environment or the economy. Is that something that, I mean, our viewers are concerned that our fellow citizens, the electorate, isn't as well informed as they could be in order to make the decisions when it comes to the ballot box? Is there something that, is there a way that we can address that lack of information, especially about the EU's role in addressing inequalities, protecting the environment, or defending democracy in general? Matt, if you want to go first.
Well, I was going to have Rebecca go first because I always end up, I shouldn't. Go, Rebecca, go.
It's not fair. Okay. Yeah, well, I think that this is related with what Matt and I were talking about, like the EU being very institutional issue and covered by, like traditional media in a very like hierarchical way. I guess like and what happened is like citizens really, what we have seen not just about the EU but in general, like citizens really want to understand the complexity of the reality that they are living right now. We are living in a very complex world, and they have a lot of questions and they ask questions and they look for them wherever they find it. But the thing is that in general, from the social sector, progressive actors, we don't know how to reach the people, and we don't do like all the efforts that I think that we should do to reach them. And these efforts, on the contrary, like the far right authoritarian actors are really doing it. These efforts to reach them. So it is. We always like focus a lot on like the data and these kind of things, but I think that we should also like do an effort to really understand what kind of languages and what formats and so on we could use to reach the people and answer the questions. I'm sure that people in all the countries in Europe want to know what the European Union is doing for the country, and they are open to understand that and to see how the country is benefiting. So working on not just on the narratives, but also on the formats and the communications, strategic communications, I think it's really relevant.
Yeah, and I would just add that's spot on. You got to first you have to talk to people and talk so that they'll listen. So you can't start from where you are at to reach them. You have to start where they are at. And Rebecca, you had talked in your presentation about really outlining specific benefits. People have to communicate with them, to reach them. Talking in terms of benefits, how does the European Union benefit them? What do they get? What specifically, how does it change their life day to day? How does it make a difference in their life? And in my presentation, I talked about the focusing on hope instead of fear. The problem is the opposition here uses fear-based messages the algorithms love fear-based messages, and those fear-based messages really push the buttons, especially of the people who are more likely to think the world's a dangerous place, that they might have some latent authoritarianism, they're scared, or they're marginalized economically, and or they're worried that they're being left behind. So, you know, we have to become better at communicating and really communicate with broader audiences, and push the hope, but not just hope as in free to be you and me. Here's what it means. Here's how it makes a difference to you. And here's why it's important for you and future generations. That's the key in terms of messaging. And the problem with the institutional press is they make everything a false equivalent. In this country, Trump tried to subvert an election. The Democrats aren't doing a good job calling him on it. How is that equivalent? He's a traitor. He should be brought up on charges of treason, but it's a false equivalency. And so the media works as even-handed. So I think there is interest in the public in getting more information, but they're not going to get it if it's in a 100-page report, because they're not going to read it. So bite-sized pieces of information that show the benefit of the things we care about. And it matters, and get them emotionally. You got to grab them by the heart.
Indeed. Often we spend a lot of time appealing to people's intellect, but and we neglect the need to appeal also to their heart. And maybe that's a good way to finish today's discussion. As I said at the beginning, this is a live project. We're keen to work with partners in all countries to make sure that the data and the knowledge that comes from it is applied on the ground. So please don't hesitate to contact us. Either visit listentoeurope.info or europeanmovement.eu, and you can find more information on how to work with us, Matthew, Rebecca, and other partners in this project. Once again, a big thank you to the Youth Council for their support in organizing this. It has been a pleasure to see both of you, Matt and Rebecca, again, and we look forward to working with you in the future, both in Portugal, but also around Europe. Have a good afternoon and enjoy the rest of the week. Thanks a lot.